Welcome to the debate. I am really glad you are tuning in today. We're going to talk about a pretty intense topic, but we're going to start with a story. Imagine a man walking into the cold woods.
Right, and he is a hunter. He goes out every single day to find food.
Exactly. But he is not just feeding himself. That is the key part. He brings his catch home to feed his elderly parents, his wife, and, his young children.
Yeah, because humans are actually totally unique in the animal kingdom. I mean, we have these very long childhoods, and we have very long old ages.
Right. Even after our physical ability to work just disappears, we keep living for a long time. And this entire system of survival, it really only works because of an unspoken promise between the generations.
A huge promise. His parents fed him when he was little.
Yes. And now he feeds them. And he is raising children who will eventually, one day, feed him.
It is such a brilliant thought experiment from our source material today. I mean, it captures the exact core of human society. When the hunt is good, the meat is divided equally.
1/3 goes to the young children.
Right. And 1/3 goes to the working adults. And the last third goes to the elderly. Everyone gets enough to eat, and the system just hums along perfectly.
But the entire premise rests on a really fragile assumption. It assumes that the hunt will always be good.
Exactly. And that there will always be enough hunters out there. Which brings us to the central question for our debate today. What happens when the hunt is bad?
Right? What happens when food is scarce? Because someone's share has to be cut.
Yeah, and if you cut the young hunter's share, well, he might lose the strength of the motivation to keep hunting.
And if you cut the children's share, they grow up weak. Your next generation of hunters just fails. So, a lot of people might look at the elders. Cutting their share seems like the simplest math.
But the hunter hesitates, because he knows he will soon be old too.
Yes. Cutting the elders' food is exactly like telling his future self, you must die in 10 years.
But we are not just talking about a story in a forest today. I mean, this is the exact reality of the United States Social Security and pension systems right now.
We are forcing the modern hunter to make a choice.
We really are. The money we rely on to pay our elders is running out. We're looking at the Social Security trust funds being completely depleted by the early 2030s.
Which is not that far away.
No, it is right around the corner. The math is catching up with us because our society is aging rapidly and, well, the birth rate is dropping.
So today we are exploring this deeply philosophical and moral dilemma. I will be arguing that we must protect the benefits of the elderly. Pensions are an unbreakable moral promise. They act as intergenerational insurance, and honoring that promise is how we protect human dignity.
And I will be arguing that the share given to the elderly must be heavily reformed. We have to reduce it. Protecting the young and the working-age population is not cruel. It is basically the only practical way to ensure that our society actually has a future at all.
Okay, so let's lay out exactly what is at stake here. Senior citizens have contributed to this system their entire lives. They were the hunters once.
Right, they did their part.
Exactly. They went into the workplace, they paid their taxes, and they supported the generation before them. Social Security is not just some line item on a government spreadsheet that we can erase when the budget gets tight.
But it is a spreadsheet problem.
Well, hold on. It is a fundamental moral duty first. When we talk about cutting the share of the elders, we are talking about breaking a profound social contract. As our source material powerfully states, telling the elders to eat less is telling your future self to die.
That is a strong statement.
It is. Because if we break this unspoken promise, we destroy social trust entirely. Why would anyone participate in a society that throws you away the moment you stop producing economic value?
Look, I get that. But because the basic machinery of our society has changed entirely, we just cannot pretend otherwise.
What do you mean by machinery?
I mean the demographics, the actual people. When the Social Security system was designed in the 1930s, there were many, many workers for every one retiree. It was something like 40 workers supporting a single senior citizen.
Right, the numbers were very different back then.
Exactly. And now, that number is dropping closer to 2 workers for every 1 retiree. So the burden on the young worker is getting heavier every single day.
But they still have a duty?
Sure, but if you cut the young worker's share by taxing him too heavily, he loses the ability to build a life. He cannot buy a home. He cannot afford to have children.
Okay, housing costs are definitely an issue.
Right, and if you prevent the young from thriving, the next generation grows weak. Protecting the young is practically essential here. If the young fail, the entire system collapses, and then nobody eats.
I hear you, but treating this purely as a math problem ignores the psychological and social reality of aging. You are describing a situation where we basically just abandon the elders to balance a spreadsheet.
I am not saying abandon them. I am saying we have to adjust.
But let's look at how the system actually works. Social Security is not a personal savings account. It isn't a glass jar where you put your own money in and pull that exact same money out 50 years later.
A lot of people think it is, though.
Right, but it is not. It is intergenerational insurance. And insurance is something we all pull together to protect the most vulnerable among us. You don't know exactly how long you will live. You don't know if you will become disabled. The system protects the entire family unit.
You call it insurance, but I have to tell you, younger generations do not see it that way at all.
Why not? It acts like a safety net.
Because millennials and Generation Z look at their paychecks, they see the payroll taxes coming out every 2 weeks, and they know the money will not be there for them in the same way.
Well, it might look different, but it will be there.
To them, it does not look like a beautiful, unspoken promise between generations. It looks like forced savings that penalize the young. They feel like they are being forced to pay full price for a subscription service they will never be allowed to use.
Okay, but the phrase forced savings fundamentally misrepresents the concept. If the government did not provide this collective insurance, that young worker would still have to feed his elderly parents out of his own pocket.
Which is how it worked before the 1930s.
Exactly. The financial burden wouldn't magically disappear if we got rid of the tax. It would just be shifted directly onto individual families. And let's be honest, many of those families simply could not afford it.
That is fair.
The real crisis here isn't just a lack of money in the system, it is a crisis of trust. And breaking the contract with seniors destroys the very foundation of that societal trust.
But trust requires fairness. How is it fair to ask a shrinking group of young people to carry a massive, growing group of older people?
It is fair because they will be old one day too.
You mentioned how the system actually works, so let's break down the mechanics for our listeners. Social Security is a pay-as-you-go system.
Right.
The taxes collected from today's workers go directly out the door to pay today's retirees. For a long time, we collected way more than we needed, and that surplus went into a trust fund.
Which was a smart move at the time.
It was. But now, because the baby boomer generation is retiring and people are living much, much longer, we are pulling more money out than we are putting in. By the early 2030s, that trust fund surplus will be gone.
Exactly. And when that trust fund is depleted, the law actually says benefits must automatically be cut to match whatever tax money is currently coming in.
Right.
We're looking at an automatic cut of over 20% to seniors if we do nothing.
Which proves my point, honestly. The trust is already broken because the young feel like the terms of the contract were changed before they were even born.
I wouldn't say the terms changed. The math just got harder.
But they are dealing with record-high housing costs, they have massive student debt, and yet they are asked to carry the heaviest tax burden ever to fund a system that is bleeding cash.
But what is the alternative?
If younger generations just refuse to pay into Social Security, the system would stop tomorrow. They participate because it is the law, but the resentment is absolutely building.
But if we follow that resentment to its logical conclusion, someone has to take the hit. And your argument suggests the elderly should bear the brunt of it.
I am saying they have to share the burden.
Targeting the elderly might seem like the simplest solution on paper, but it is ultimately self-defeating. It completely ignores the basic human condition. Everyone eventually grows old.
Yes, everyone ages.
Right. So the core message of the hunter's dilemma is, how will the present me treat the future me? When a young person says, cut the elderly's benefits, they are literally attacking their own future security. They are voting to make themselves poorer in old age.
But what good is that moral purity if the young hunter simply stops hunting?
What do you mean stops hunting?
Because if he quits, everyone starves anyway. You talk about the morality of the present self treating the future self well, but if the present self cannot survive today, there is no future self to worry about.
Are they really not surviving, though?
Yes, we have a term for this happening right now. People call it quiet quitting, or we see young couples simply refusing to have children because they literally cannot afford it.
The declining birth rate is a huge problem, I agree.
It fundamentally breaks the old one-third, one-third, one-third split we talked about at the start.
But are the young truly unable to survive, or are they just being asked to share the resources fairly, as society has always done? I mean, we have more wealth in our society today than at any point in human history. The pie is large enough.
The overall pie might be large, yes, but the fair share is changing entirely because of demographics. Let's go back to the basic design of the thought experiment.
Okay, the hunter and the meat.
Right. The meat is supposed to be split equally among kids, adults, and the elderly. What happens when the birth rate drops so low that there are very few kids, fewer adults, and a massive, massive number of elders?
The fractions change.
Exactly. The split isn't 1/3 anymore. The elders need half the meat, or maybe 2/3 of the meat just to survive. There simply aren't enough hunters to sustain the elders' share without completely crushing the young. We cannot just ignore the reality of a shrinking workforce.
I am not ignoring it, but you're assuming we only have a few grim choices, like we either crush the young, starve the kids, or starve the old.
Those are the numbers we are facing.
But instead of just fighting over how to slice a shrinking pie, we need to focus on how we change the recipe. We do not have to abandon the elderly. There are practical ways to fix the math without throwing away our humanity.
Okay, I am all for fixing the math. How do we actually do that without putting more weight on the young workers' back?
We have to combine policy efforts. It isn't just one magic fix. First, we can reform the system for fairer burden sharing. Right now, Social Security payroll taxes are only collected on income up to a certain cap.
Right, the payroll tax cap.
Exactly. If you make over that cap, which is roughly $160,000 or so right now, you don't pay Social Security taxes on the rest of your income.
Wait, let me make sure our listeners get this. So if I make $1 million, I stop paying the tax after the first $160,000?
That is exactly right. Your percentage of tax is much lower than a middle-class worker's. We could adjust how taxes are collected so that the wealthiest earners put a little more meat in the pot throughout the year.
Okay, lifting the tax cap is a popular idea, I will give you that. But it does not solve the whole deficit.
It helps a lot, though.
Sure, but even if you tax all income, the massive wave of retirees still outpaces the revenue coming in. You eventually have to reduce the benefits going out. This is why I argue we need to means test the system.
Let's explain what means testing actually does. Because it sounds harmless, but it changes the entire nature of the program.
Means testing simply means we look at a retiree's income and their wealth. If they are a multimillionaire, they just don't get a Social Security check. Or, they get a much smaller one.
So you are punishing them for saving.
No, I am saying we reduce the share of the meat going to the wealthy elders so the poorest elders can survive. And the young hunter can keep a little more of his paycheck for his own children. Why should a young, struggling worker pay taxes to fund a monthly check for a wealthy retired CEO?
Because the moment you means test Social Security, it is no longer intergenerational insurance. It becomes a welfare program.
Is that such a bad thing?
Yes, because welfare programs are politically vulnerable. The beauty of the one-third, one-third, one-third split is that everyone is in it together. The wealthy CEO paid into it and the CEO gets it. The factory worker paid into it and the factory worker gets it.
I see what you were saying about fairness.
If you tell the wealthy and the middle class that they have to pay into a system their whole lives, but will get absolutely nothing back, they will vote to dismantle the system entirely. You lose the universal support that keeps the program alive.
But the universal support is already crumbling. That is my whole point. We cannot cling to a perfect universal one-third split when the population looks like an upside-down pyramid. If we don't means test, we have to look at other ways to reduce the burden. What about raising the retirement age?
That is another lever we can pull, yes. When the system was created, life expectancy was much lower.
Yeah, a lot of people died before they even reached 65.
Exactly. Many people didn't live long enough to collect their benefits. Today, people routinely live into their 80s and 90s.
If we live longer, healthier lives, the hunting season can be extended. Gradually raising the retirement age basically recognizes that biological reality.
You can't just call it a biological reality and ignore the human cost. Raising the retirement age is essentially a massive benefit cut, especially for the working class.
How is it a cut if they just work a few years longer?
Think about the physical reality of different jobs. A lawyer or like an accountant might easily work at a desk until they are 70.
True.
But a construction worker, a roofer, a nurse who spends 12 hours a day on their feet, their bodies might not physically let them work that long.
That is a very real concern.
If you raise the retirement age to 70, you are essentially telling the blue-collar worker that they will get fewer years of rest or they might just die before they collect what they paid for. It is a highly unequal solution.
Which is why raising the retirement age has to be done really carefully. Perhaps with exemptions or expanded disability protections for those who physically cannot continue. We have to ensure that our reforms still protect human dignity.
It just sounds super complicated to enforce.
It is complicated, but it is necessary. And there are other ways to expand the workforce, too. If we don't have enough young hunters born here, we can increase immigration.
Bringing more people in?
Yes, we can invite working-age people from other places to join our society, pay taxes, and help carry the load.
Immigration definitely shifts the demographics. It brings in new taxpayers. And I think we can also look at advancements in technology.
You mean like AI?
Exactly. We're entering an era with incredible leaps in artificial intelligence and robotics. These technologies have the potential to boost our economic productivity massively.
So the hunters get better tools.
Right. If one hunter with an AI tool can do the work of 10 hunters, then the overall wealth of society increases. And we do that without needing 10 physical humans.
Well, that perfectly illustrates my point. Technology could generate the wealth needed to fulfill our moral promise to the elderly. We don't have to choose between crushing the young and starving the old if we can use AI and immigration to grow our resources.
It is a great idea, but there is a massive timeline problem with both of those solutions.
What do you mean?
The trust funds run out in the early 2030s. That is less than a decade away. AI is amazing, but it is not going to completely replace the need for human labor and generate enough taxable revenue to close a multi-trillion-dollar gap in the next 7 or 8 years.
Things move fast, though.
Not that fast. And immigration also takes time to integrate. Plus, those immigrants will eventually grow old and need pensions themselves. My point here is really about urgency.
The clock is ticking.
The immediate deficits require us to prioritize the young right now. If we don't make hard cuts today, we literally won't make it to that high-tech robotic future.
The urgency is definitely real, but prioritizing the young cannot mean abandoning the old. The way we talk about the system matters so much. If we treat pensions merely as a financial burden like dead weight on the economy, we lose our humanity.
We are not losing our humanity. We are trying to survive.
But the elders are not a burden. They're our parents. They're us in a few decades. If we frame this as a war between generations, where the young must defeat the old to survive, everyone loses.
I hear your passion, I really do. But ignoring the financial spreadsheet doesn't make the math go away. You can have all the moral sympathy in the world, but if there is no meat in the camp, people go hungry.
Yes, but
The tension between individual interests and the long-term survival of the community is at a breaking point right now. The young worker is exhausted. If he feels that the system is just a machine built to drain his resources for a promise he will never see, he will stop participating.
how can he stop? It is taxes.
He will move, he will hide his income, or he will simply stop working as hard.
When you strip away all the economic terms we have discussed today, the trust funds, the dependency ratios, the tax caps, your position really boils down to the idea that survival requires sacrificing the promise we made to our elders.
It requires adjusting it, yes.
But I maintain that the pension problem is not just about money. It is about social trust. Senior citizens have paid into this system their entire lives under a very specific agreement. Breaking that promise would destroy the foundation of our society.
Even if it saves the young?
We can save the young without breaking the promise. We can solve this through a combination of solutions, adjusting taxes, utilizing technology, embracing immigration without throwing away our moral duty. An attack on the elderly is an attack on our future selves.
And when you strip away the idealism from your side, it really boils down to ignoring a mathematical reality that is absolutely crushing the next generation.
I wouldn't say I am ignoring it.
But the demographic reality is undeniable. There are fewer young workers and a rapidly growing number of retirees. We must protect the producers, the young, working-age people, and the children.
We have to protect everyone.
If we place an impossible tax burden on the young, just to maintain a promise made in a totally different century, they will break. And if the working generation breaks, the entire society fails. We must be willing to reduce or change the share that goes to the elderly to ensure our actual survival.
This discussion really highlights why the pension crisis is a deep moral and philosophical dilemma.
It really is.
To summarize, it is far more than just a political talking point. From my side, it asks us what kind of society we want to build. Do we view human beings only for their economic output, or do we value them for their inherent dignity and the trust we share?
And on my side, it forces us to confront the severe, real-world tension between our own individual interests today and the long-term survival of the whole community tomorrow. The math has to work, or the whole system falls apart.
There is still so much more to explore about how our society will balance this unspoken intergenerational promise in the coming years.
Absolutely.
We leave it to you, our listeners, to think about how you would divide the food. Because eventually, everyone has to answer the question, when the cold winter comes to the forest, how will the present you treat the future you?